Welcome to another talk about the Iliad. This is book 4 that we're covering today, book 4. And we want to talk first about what has happened before this, right? Plot summary. So prior to this, we have had Achilles pulling his men out of battle because he gets angry with Agamemnon, who has stolen his gal, and he cries to his mother, and his mother goes to Zeus, and Zeus agrees to send down tragedy on the Achaeans so that Achilles will be needed back at war. And then we have book 2, Agamemnon tests his men, and Odysseus wraps a guy over the back and encourages everybody to go back to war, and they do. And then we get the listing of all the armies. And then in book 3, we've got Helen reviewing the champions, and we see her situation, her state of existence. And we see her being sent back by Aphrodite to Paris. And she goes back to him, but she hates him. She loathes him. And so we get a sense of what that relationship was. We covered the various myths that preceded this work, or that surrounded this work, almost like a matrix, like a womb, including the story, for instance, of the judgment of Paris, and how Paris chose Aphrodite over Hera and Athena. We also saw or talked about the story of the Atreidi and the war that went on between the families of Atreides and the cousins and all this. And then we saw a little bit about Agamemnon, who he was as a character. We looked at the characters, especially in this book, which are very important to look at. So the ones we looked at are Helen, Paris, and Achilles. Achilles, remember, is Blubber Boy. He's from Achaeos in Greek, and that he is a character who is very impetuous, very young, very youthful, and consequently has to change because that's necessary in life. You know, the Greeks were saying that you have to grow up. And then we looked at the character of Helen, her pathetic situation. She's a survivor, but she's in a very dangerous situation. We looked at Paris and how he's the example of the incontinent man. We talked a little bit about the myth of Leda on the Swan and the birth of the Dioscuri and Helen and Clytemnestra. And what else? Oh yes, the theme of transformation or metamorphosis, which surrounds this whole story, weaves itself through this whole story. So we looked at that. Now, book 4. Here we are, and we start off the whole text with a scene of the gods. Now, remember, one of the lines that Homer's drawing out here is that the gods are to be undermined. He's undermining the gods, showing them to be less than noble, and he's showing the humans as being very noble. And so in this chapter 4, we're going to get a little of that. Remember that there is a concept of chiasmus, which is that one thing on one end balances out something on the other end. And book 1 and book 24, book 2, book 23, book 3, book 22, and book 4, book 21. And that the whole text can be divided into these sections, like bits of 4, right? 4, 8, 12. And then the next section of 4, 8, 12. And so we got these quatrains, if you will, that balance one another out as well. That's another structural pattern that goes on. So this book 4, is going to be, if we go backwards at 24, 23, 22, 21, it's balancing book 21. And let's do a quick visual to look at what book 21 actually is going to be showing us in the future. If you've read the whole work, again, this is going to be a little bit more obvious. But this is book 21. Let me share the screen here. Book 21, that's balancing out this book, is Achilles fights the river. And there's a lot that goes on in that book, but mostly it's carnage and battle. And as it says, there's a scene where Achilles fights against elemental forces. The river itself rises up against Achilles, and he's fighting the water, fighting the river. That's a traditional image of chaos and the futility of fighting against something you can't stop. So in some ways, it's like this book here that we're going to see, which is a truce erupts in war. To some degree, it's almost as though it's showing us this futility of war, this futility of struggle that goes on. And there's a lot of struggle in this chapter, in this book. But it's futile. It doesn't go anywhere. In order to add to that futility, I thought today one of the first things we could do is to look at two legends, both surrounding Agamemnon. And Agamemnon is the leader of the Achaeans. He's the guy that took the gal away from Achilles way back, start of the story. And what kind of guy is Agamemnon? Well, in order to understand him, I think we need to look at his story, the myth that surrounds him. And this primarily is the myth, it starts off with the myth of Iphigenia. Iphigenia is the daughter of Agamemnon and his wife Clytemnestra. Now, if you remember in our previous story, our previous myth, we have Zeus in the form of a swan who conceives a child with Leda, and Leda has two eggs emerge forth, and they hatch and they become the Dioscuri, Castor and Polydeuces, and Iphigenia and Helen. And we looked at that little chart, the Mendelian square gene chart, which shows capital G, capital G, capital G, lowercase g, capital G, lowercase g, lowercase g, lowercase g. It's that sort of how do these genes come down to us that make the traits that we have. Greeks weren't aware of this necessarily, but it's something like this described in the myth of Castor and Pollux, and then of Helen and Iphigenia. Helen is the big G, big G. She has divine in her. She is a divine character through and through, beautiful, talented, gorgeous, well-spoken, graceful. Castor and Polydeuces, they have a little of both. They have an admixture of graceful, divine, and sort of mortal clumsiness, or whatever you want to say, viciousness, savagery. The character that is the little g is Clytemnestra. She's got the short end of the stick genetically, so to speak. She's got mortal in her. And she gets married off to Agamemnon. And it's not a good bargain for Agamemnon, because he doesn't get the beautiful, gorgeous, perfect sister that he wants originally. He gets the secondhand sister, so to speak. But she is the elder by birth, because she does come out of the egg first. And so she grows up being disfavored, but in the line of succession, so to speak, she is the more important daughter. Helen is the less important, but the more beautiful daughter. And that's the one that Agamemnon doesn't get. So that causes a little bit of marital tension there, you could imagine. But then there's marital tension in the character of Agamemnon, because of course he comes from that long line of the Atreides family, the Atreidai, Atreus' household. And the Atreidai are known for violence and infighting and savagery, and they're the gangster family. So he, growing up as the heir to all that, is a little bit like, I don't know, it's like Vito Corleone or something from The Godfather. Rough, tough, savage kind of guy. So the savage guy gets married to Clytemnestra, and war comes to the Greeks. All these Greeks are loosely connected city-states, and they the Mycenaean civilization. They're not a nation. They're not a country. Troy is a city, but it's connected to an empire, the Hittite Empire. So they're much more civilized, and they're much more cohesive than the Greeks are. The Greeks are loosely based, almost piratical cities that are connected to one another in order to take advantage of trade and piracy and warfare. And remember that they have all sworn a blood oath to protect, this is Odysseus' idea, to protect the woman and the man, to protect Helen and the man who marries her, okay? So when Helen gets married to Menelaus, for however that happens, right? Whether it's an actual legitimate lottery or whether it's a rigged lottery, we don't know. But Helen and Menelaus get married, and all the other men vow to protect her and protect Menelaus. So when Paris comes, in the judgment of Paris comes from Troy, and he seduces her and takes her away to the big city, the civilized city, the Hittite connected city. And then all the Greeks, the Achaeans, they say, well, we need to go get her back. That's what we got to do. And Menelaus should lead that because that's his wife, right? But no, it's his brother who leads it. It's Agamemnon who leads it. So Agamemnon has to get the fleet over to Troy. And for one reason or another, the winds blow against them. The winds blow against them and they don't change, and they don't get the wind to be able to send over the majority of the fleet. They can't make the war happen because of this weather thing going on the gods have sent to them. And so they have to placate the gods. And how do they placate the gods? They give the most powerful sacrifice that anybody could give, which is human sacrifice. And Agamemnon is so keen to get this war going. He's so keen to get Helen back. You can make of that what you will. He's so keen to do it that he says we have to have a human sacrifice. But he knows if any of the generals volunteer to be sacrificed, or if they volunteer one of their people or one of their children, he's going to have dissent among the ranks. So what does he do? He chooses his own daughter, and he sacrifices his own daughter, Iphigenia, to the gods, killing her at the altars, cutting her throat. And the winds lift, and the whole of the fleet can get across to Troy. Now let that sink in for just a minute. That basically this type of guy is the type of guy who would sacrifice his own flesh and blood, his own daughter, who's normally depicted as a young girl, as a teenager. But he would sacrifice his own daughter in order to get this war started. So he would go across the sea and sack and pillage other people's homes in order to get Helen back, who's not even his own wife. Doesn't sit too well, does it? It shouldn't. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to be a horror. It's supposed to be an awful thing. Even the ancient world people saw this as an awful thing. It was horrendous. But Agamemnon does this. He kills his own daughter, Iphigenia, in order to get the fleet underway. And they get underway. And lo and behold, they go to Troy, and for 10 years, they sack the city, and they finally take the city. Yay. Let's look for a minute at this, at an account of this very story, which is actually at a website I would recommend called GreekMythology.com. And here it says, Iphigenia, a little depiction of her, the daughter of Agamemnon and Clytemnestra in Greek, one of the most connected with the beginning of the Trojan War. When the Greek fleet gathered at Aulis to sail against Troy, so Aulis is an island there off the coast of Mycenae. The wind stopped, and the seer Calchas declared that Artemis was angry with Agamemnon. Artemis is the hunter goddess, and she's the virgin hunter goddess, and she gets angry, especially at men who are brutal, who want to take rather than ask. And so in order to placate her, you had to have a young girl as a sacrifice. It's part of the reason he chooses Iphigenia. Artemis was an interesting goddess because young girls normally were they were pampered, they were taken care of. But when they became women, normally when their bodies changed, it was a tradition that they would take all their toys, all their dolls, all their little dresses, and then put them at the altar of Artemis. And then they were no longer girls, they were women. So in some ways, that's kind of connected to this, that the young girl, the old self, the young girl has to be sacrificed at the altar of Artemis in order to do this adult thing of sacking the city. That's one way to look at it. We also have to consider that the sacrifice of one's own kith and kin is never a good thing, period, flat out. That was one of the worst things you could do. Human sacrifice, even in the ancient world, was seen as something really horrendous, and they only did it in cases of real necessity. So sacrificing his own daughter was a terrible, terrible thing. Had it been for a good cause, maybe it would have been a little acceptable for his immediate household. The fact that he does it for someone else's wife, I think, it would definitely rankle. And the fact that it was done for the beautiful sister who got everything at the expense of the ugly sister who didn't get everything must have really, really hit home to Clytemnestra. So the story says, is the goddess Artemis. Agamemnon was told to sacrifice his daughter Iphigenia. In some versions, she died at Aulis, and in others, Artemis saved her at the last moment, carried her away to Taurus, where she became the goddess's priestess. And in our story by Homer, he killed her. He sacrificed her. So we don't get that that nice Deus Ex Machina thing. Usually said to be the daughter of Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and Clytemnestra, daughter of Tyndareus and Leda. Her siblings include Orestes, he comes into play later, Electra, and Chrysothemis. Through her father, she belonged to the cursed house of Atreus, a family marked by betrayal, murder, revenge, and inherited guilt. Iphigenia is inseparable from Agamemnon's role as leader of the Greek army. Agamemnon was the brother of Menelaus. His wife was Helen. She was taken to Troy by Paris. Because of the old oath sworn by Helen's suitors, the Greek kings gathered to cover her. As the most powerful ruler among them, Agamemnon became commander of the expedition. But as it says here, she's central to the later hatred between Clytemnestra and Agamemnon. To Clytemnestra, the sacrifice or near sacrifice of Iphigenia was not only a political act, but the murder of her child. This grief became one of the main reasons she later kills Agamemnon after he returns from Troy. So that's a spoiler, obviously, but that's the second part of this myth. Clytemnestra, when Agamemnon goes away, Clytemnestra is seething with anger and seeking revenge against her husband, whom she never seems to have really loved. It was a political marriage, right? And now she's seething with anger against him because he killed her little girl. How to kill this big brute of a man? Well, the first thing she does is somehow, don't know how, she gets in contact with his exiled cousin, Aegisthus. Remember on that family tree that we showed in the last episode, 2 episodes away, that Aegisthus is part of the family tree of Atreus as well, but he gets basically abandoned by the Atreus family that rises to power. He's, I think, the son of Thyestes, if I remember right. And she, Clytemnestra, contracts with Aegisthus to come into the palace. And he does, and he becomes her lover. And together, they start to rule the city of Mycenae or Sparta? I always forget. Mycenae. And when he gets home, when Agamemnon gets home, after having won the war and he gets back and everything's hunky-dory, right? He comes home and she is hiding the fact that she has a lover. She's so glad to see him. She brings him in. She gives him a bath. She anoints him with oil. And then she throws a net over him and traps him and then chops him up into little gobbets using an axe. And that's the end of him. So the great man, the most powerful king who starts this whole war, this whole business by killing his little daughter in order to get back the wife of his brother, he ends up being destroyed by his wife, Clytemnestra, sister of Helen, who was enraged because of the sacrifice of Iphigenia. Now, that story is a sufficient thing for understanding what's going on here in the Homeric work. It doesn't end there, because the legend goes on to the son of Agamemnon, who is Orestes, and the daughter, Electra. And there are 2 good plays made by the Greek playwrights. Orestes is put into the only trilogy that we have left, which is by Aeschylus. And Electra is made into a play by, I think, Sophocles. So check those out. They're good plays to watch or to read. I highly recommend them. But the gist of it is that Orestes comes back as well because he comes late to the war, and he comes back after his father, and he seeks revenge for the death of his father, has to kill his mom in order to get that revenge. But he does. And so he kills his mom and her lover Aegisthus. And then he's pursued by demons across the countryside. The demons are called the bright ladies. Suddenly lost the name of it, but they're called the Bright Ladies. But they were demons of revenge. It'll come to me when I don't need it. And he finally flees to, I think, Athens, where he finally seeks help from the Athenian people who put him on trial and find him not guilty. And he's allowed to be free after that. So Eumenides. There we go. I knew it would come to me when I didn't need it. The bright ladies, the Eumenides, the good ladies. But for our sake, we need to know that story of Iphigenia because it gives us a sense of who this guy is. Who is Agamemnon? What type of character is he? He's the kind of guy who would sacrifice his own daughter in order to get the war underway. An unpleasant character, truly brutal character, but not a one-dimensional villain. He's the kind of guy who loves certain things, and he loves his brother very much, which adds a character to him. It adds a dimension to him that we didn't have otherwise. So knowing that story of Iphigenia and that story of Agamemnon at the end being killed kind of bookend the epic gives us a sense or a greater sense of what kind of thing we're dealing with when we deal with these two characters, Agamemnon and Menelaus. I mean, you could take this side, I suppose, and say, what kind of man would allow his brother to go to war to save his wife rather than going to war himself? What kind of man is Menelaus? That's up for speculation. Nevertheless, here we have the story of the Trojan War as told by Homer. And we'll look at the text itself here by Fagles. This is the truce erupts in war. And we start off with the Council of the Gods. Now, remember, the gods are being made into something less than noble by Homer. He's undermining the gods. Why would he do that, we might ask? What could be the purpose? One thing that we could say is that when we have gods that are ignoble, they are no longer deserving of worship. And that breaks the hold that they have over our imagination. You know, and this is still true even now, I think to some degree, whatever the Greeks meant by gods is still with us to some degree. They haven't disappeared. They are powers or forces or attitudes, I suppose you could say, or things that undermine the created world. Who knows? But if, for instance, we hold them as gods, they have a hold over us. It might have been Augustine who said something to the effect that the ancient gods are real. They're real spirits. And when they are worshipped as gods, they become demons. Now, it's not quite Augustine because he's probably much more eloquent than that, but that's my memory of him. When worshipped as gods, these powers become demons. What could he have meant by that? Well, I think part of what he meant we can see if we take any one of the powers that are represented now. Say, for instance, war, Ares, right? Let's say that we end up giving our life to war, and we end up making a thing of war, and not just war on the battlefield, fighting everybody, pugnaciousness, combat. If combat, argument, warfare is everything for us, we study the arts of war, we throw ourselves into fights, verbal or physical. We are pugnacious with everybody because that's what we see as the only way to survive. And after a while, that tends to take us over. We see the world as violent, and we see the world as against us, and we end up thinking in no other way but warfare. It becomes something that drives us forwards. It pushes us around, and every decision we make is based on our concept that the world is about war. Take another one. Aphrodite, right? Goddess of lust. Let's say that we think that lust is where it's at, and that the culmination of lust, the clutching of another human being, cleppeth and clutcheth, is the goal of life. We could use other phrases, but as a family program here, I'm not going to. If that's the goal, to get a man or to get a girl, and that's all we think about, we do everything, but we slick back the hair, right? We put on the perfume, we wear the fancy clothes, we lift the weights, we do the jogging. We get the Botox, we get the white teeth, right? All in order to get that thing, that golden apple, that end goal. Well, it drives us around after a while. everything becomes subordinate to that force that we see as a god. We don't call it that, but that's what it is. It's essentially, it's a godlike force over us. I've often reflected on the idea of why the Ten Commandments begin with the first one. Why is that first commandment the first commandment in the Bible? I am the Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. And then second is, you shall make no graven images. Why is that first commandment that first commandment? I think part of it is when you make something that is not God into God, it becomes a demonic enslaving force. It becomes a demiurge, to use the terminology of those who are Gnostic. As soon as we start thinking about powers or forces as being divine and we can't stand up to them, can't do anything about them, they are the end goal of life. Well, they have power over us. They have control over us. And how do we break that control? Whether it's lust, or whether it's violence, or whether it's money, or whether it's education. I mean, so many different things that could become, quote unquote, gods. Food, science. How do we break the hold of those things over us so that we become free individuals? Well, one of the ways is to show them as ignoble. This is what they really do. This is what they really accomplish. If your God is progress and you are a progressive, and that is your end goal, to progress and help human beings to progress, part of what you have to be shown in order to break that hold is that this God of progress is ignoble. It shouldn't have power over you. It's not worthy of your worship. C.S. Lewis does this in a great work called That Hideous Strength. The God of progress there is the head of the organization. He's the head. And they always have to consult the head and go to the head and talk to the head and find out what the head thinks. And when you finally find out who's in charge, it is literally a head in a jar. And Lewis is showing us that when it comes down to it, this quote unquote God that's worshipped by the progressive movement in that story is not worthy of worship. He's just a head in a jar. He does that in other stories too. But my point being is that Homer's doing this with the gods of the Greeks, the Achaean gods and the Trojan gods. The gods that Homer sings about are ignoble. They're unworthy of worship. And by seeing that, we begin to see, oh, that breaks the imaginative world. That breaks the hold that it has over us and makes us slaves. So here at the start, we have the gods in court with one another. And how do they talk? They talk with cunning, mocking taunts, right? Zeus infuriating Hera, constant tumult between the gods, and what would you call marital dysfunction between Zeus and Hera. And he says, those two goddesses there are Menelaus' best defense here of Argos, Boeotia, and Athena, guard of armies. Look at them sitting apart watching the dueling, so they take their pleasure. Look at those dames over there. It's all they care about is just watching humans die. What losers. But Aphrodite here, with her everlasting laughter, always stands by Paris and drives the deadly spirits from her man. Aphrodite is a real woman. She looks out for her man. Whereas Hera and Athena don't. And look, Aphrodite's done a good thing. She's plucked her man away from battle. Any good goddess should do that, right? Ha, ha, ha. So now we plan how the war will work out. Do we rouse the pain and grisly fighting once again, or hand down pacts of peace between both armies? If only it might prove well and good to all, to every mortal god. Men might still live on in royal Priam's citadel, and Helen of Argos, Menelaus just might lead her home again. And the two goddesses are like, will you shut up, you jerk? And so Hera bursts out in anger to Zeus. Dread majesty, son of Cronus, what are you saying? How can you think of making all my labor worthless? All gone for nothing? Mortal labor, the sweat I poured, my horses panting, spent from launching Achaea's armies, heaping pains on Priam's and Priam's sons. Do as you please, for none of the deathless gods will ever praise you. Do whatever you want. Who cares? Go on. Just do it. And then Zeus gets angry at her. Right? And he basically tells her, well, you do as you please. Only if you could breach their gates and their long walls and devour Priam and Priam's sons and the Trojan armies raw. Then you just might cure your rage at last. Well, do as you please. Do as you told me to do it. Hey, I tell you to do as you please. But in days to come, don't let this quarrel breed some towering clash between us both, pitting you and me in conflict. Whenever I am bent on tearing down some city filled with men you love, huh? To please myself, never attempt to thwart my fury, Hera. Yeah, huh? Look out. And Hera, well, anyway, Hera comes back at him. And she tells him, I don't even care about this city, right? I like Argos, and I like Sparta, and I like Mycenae. They're all compatible with Troy. So tear them down. I don't care. Whenever you want to. Finally, the father of men and gods complied at once, and he winged Athena on with a flight of orders. Quickly, down you go to Troy's and Achaea's armies now, and see that the Trojans break the sworn truce first and trample on the Argives in the triumph. Now, let's go down and break up this truce between these men because they've stopped killing each other and start the war again. Because, he's holding them off from fighting. And Athena's eager to do that because she really wants her Achaeans to sack this city, just as Hera wants to sack the city. Probably because of that Judgment of Paris thing. Anyway, Athena goes down and she takes the form of one of the warriors. And it says, like a shooting star, Athena flashed across the earth, plunging down in the midst of both camped forces. Terror gripped the fighters looking on, stallion breaking Trojans, Argive men at arms. And they said one to another, what's next? As Achaeans and Trojans wonder what was coming, Athena merged in the Trojan columns like a fighter. So she's one with the Trojans, she becomes one of the Trojans. And she looks like Antenor's son, Laodocus, hunting for Pandarus, hoping to find the archer. So she looks like Laodocus, and she goes to find this guy, Pandarus, who's an archer. And she says to him, Pandarus, when she finds him, here's glory, son of Lycan. Let me tempt you, you with your archer skill. Have you the daring to wing an arrow at Menelaus? Just think what thanks, what fame you'd win in the eyes of all the Trojans, Prince Paris most of all. As you go and you snipe Menelaus, and everybody will praise you. So Pandarus, good to this. And he does, right? So he goes, he unstraps his polished bow, and he basically takes aim. And he shoots Menelaus. Okay. He flipped the lid of his quiver, plucked an arrow, fletched and never shot, a shaft of black pain, quickly notching the sharp arrow on the string. He swore to Apollo, wolf god, glorious archer, he'd slaughter splendid victims, newborn lambs, when he marched home to Zelea's sacred city. Squeezing the knock and string together, drawing the gut back to his nipple, iron head to the hand grip till he flexed the great weapon back in a half-circle curve. The bow sprang, the string sang out, arrow shot away, razor sharp and raging to whip through Argive ranks. But, Athena doesn't want to kill Menelaus. So even though she goes down and encourages Pandarus to shoot Menelaus, she doesn't want him dead, so she goes. And it says, she reared before you, skewed the tearing shaft, flicking it off your skin as quick as a mother flicks a fly from her baby sleeping softly. So she goes and diverts the arrow just enough so that it goes down the belt where the gold buckles clasp and breastplates overlap. And the shaft pierced the tight belt's twisted thongs, piercing the blazoned plates, piercing the guard he wore to shield his loins and block the spears. And it pierces Menelaus, and he's bleeding badly because of this. And there's this great Homeric simile that occurs here. Oop, I just messed it up. Great Homeric simile that occurs where he says, I'll get it. Picture a woman dyeing ivory blood red. This is, I guess, a thing that you would dye ivory, because the ancient world actually was very colorful, and they would paint everything. So there were the whole image of white temples and white buildings in the ancient world is a canard. It doesn't exist. They actually painted everything. So imagine a woman painting the ivory blood red. A Carian or Myonian staining a horse's cheek piece. That's another image to use. And it's stored away in a vault, and troops of riders long to sport the ornament. True, but there it lies as a king's splendor, kept and prized twice over, his team's adornment, his driver's pride and glory. So now, Menelaus, the fresh blood went staining down your sturdy thighs, your shins and well-turned ankles. So here's Menelaus, whose skin is white. It's like ivory. And he's got blood running down his leg because he got pierced right below the belt. So you can imagine right where the hip joins to the body. He gets pierced there, misses the vital organs, so it doesn't kill him. But blood spurts out and goes pouring down his leg. And in battle, you'd see suddenly blood and be like, "Oh, that guy's bleeding." That's dangerous. Danger, Will Robinson. So that's the image we get here. It's like ivory being dyed blood red. And Agamemnon sees this and he's like, "Oh my God, my brother. I can't allow him to die because, he's my brother and I love him, but also because he's the other king of the other great city, that Sparta, that basically is the dominant cities of the Mycenaean culture." So he rushes forward and he makes this long speech about, "I can't lose you," basically, right? You can't die, bro. And if you do, I'll avenge you. So, the plow land here will rot your bones, my brother, as you lie dead in Troy, your mission left unfinished because you won't get Helen back. And then some Trojan will glory, swaggering, arrogant, leaping down on the grave of famous Menelaus and say all these nasty words. Some Trojan will trumpet, "Let the earth gape and take me down that day." I don't want to hear them lording over it that you died in battle. And Menelaus returns, "Hey, I'm okay. It's all right. Right, the point's not lodged in a mortal spot. My glittering war belt stopped the shot in front." And Agamemnon says, "Oh, I hope you're right. I do. But go see the healer anyway. Go see the medic." Then he turns to the Sacred Herald, and he has him get the healer, and the hero obeys, comes and, heals Menelaus. And then we get all heck breaking loose, because that's what breaks the truce. And then you get one scene after another of outright carnage. I'm not going to go over every single scene, but Agamemnon starts in first. He's like, "You dare to break the truce and shoot my brother? I'll show you." So he jumps in the line with all his men and starts attacking the Trojans in this lust for war, it says. And much has been made about this. This is called the Kleos of Agamemnon. The Kleos is just the glory. It's a moment where a single soldier shines on the battlefield and does great deeds. So this is his Kleos, his moment of glory. And there's the moments of glory, and certainly they were concerned with glory and honor, but I don't know if that's the point of this section. It seems to me that what Homer is almost saying here is that this fragility of culture that exists here in the form of a truce can erupt like that into complete and utter chaos. Because when you read through these are very graphic stories or scenes of warfare. And just to see one or two here, he goes after various people and cuts them down. Okay, here's a simile. Think how a goat herd off on a mountain lookout spots a storm cloud moving down the sea, bearing down beneath the rush of the west wind, and miles away he sees it building black as pitch, blacker, whipping the whitecaps full hurricane fury. The herdsman shudders to see it, drives his flocks to a cave, so dense the battalions grouped behind the two Iantes, Ajax and Ajax, packed, massed with hardy fighters dear to the gods, battalions black and bristling shields and spears, fighters sweeping into the breaking storm of war. So they push forward like a storm cloud into the Trojans. And the hacking and slaying begins, and you've got image after image of humans getting chewed up in warfare. I just want to find one at least. Yeah, Agamemnon goes around and he encourages all the men to come to battle, to get in there and start fighting. And one after one, they join the battle. And here it is. We'll start here. We'll just give a few. Antilochus was the first to kill a Trojan captain, tough on the front lines. Thalesius' son Echepolus. Antilochus thrust first, speared the horsehair helmet right at the ridge, and the bronze spear point lodged in the man's forehead, smashing through his skull. And the dark came whirling down across his eyes. He toppled down like a tower in the rough assault. As he fell, the enormous Elephanor grabbed his feet. Chalcodon's son, lord of the brave-hearted Abantes, dragged him out from under the spears, rushing madly to strip his gear. But his rush was short-lived. Just as he dragged that corpse, the brave Agenor spied his ribs bared by his shield as he bent low. Agenor stabbed with a bronze spear and loosed his limbs. His life spirit left him, and over his dead body now the savage work went on. Achaeans and Trojans mauling each other there like wolves, leaping, hurtling into each other, man throttling man. And you get a whole series of these different carnage scenes. And I think part of what he's setting up here is this. It's not glorifying of the carnage. It's more like this is an awful thing that humans go through this, and that we fight each other like beasts in battle. It's often been said that the Greeks were happy about warfare, and they glorified it, and they made a spectacle of it. I think that's too broad a brush. I think that the Greeks had various attitudes towards this sort of thing. But one thing we can say is that over and over again, in the stories that depict warfare, the idea of carnage and savagery and brutality is you can't get away from it. Humans are not supposed to be this way. No, humans are not supposed to be this way. They're not supposed to turn into these monstrous animals. And when they do, it's horrendous. And the death of humans on the battlefield is the tragedy of this epic. Notice the balance that's done in this chapter, though, because we have the balance of the gods acting like idiots, and it's balanced out with the human beings acting in this dramatic, tragic, truly horrendous way. The two balance each other, because we're supposed to look at the gods who live in luxury, in palaces, in the sky. You know, this is the 1% of the 1% of the 1%, so to speak. And they never get hurt. They're immortal. They never have any troubles. They never grow old. They never have to deal with the problems of age. They have all the food they want, ambrosia. They can do whatever they want because they have powers, shape-shifting, flying, lightning coming out of their fingertips. And so what is tragedy for a god? A god who goes through all this sort of stuff, there is no tragedy. There's no sorrow. There's no misery. There's no peril. For humans, there is great peril and this great tragedy. Every one of these characters that dies in this chapter had a life, a family, a home, like we talked about in book 2. That's part of the point. And here, to see the pyrotechnics of carnage, it's a bit like watching the savagery of a war movie. You know, you see like what happens, say, Saving Private Ryan, for instance. It's not glorifying the invasion of Normandy. It's showing it in its horrific carnage. It's a similar thing here. They're not glorifying this. They're showing it in its horrific carnage. And it's carnage that erupts, on the one hand, very quickly. Drop of an arrow, right? Drop of a hat. But on the other hand, it's carnage that is prompted to occur because of the gods. And I find this really interesting about Homer. The gods, who are always in tumult and arguing with one another, there's nothing at stake for them. And yet they're the ones that cause the suffering and misery of the humans. Because the humans can't stand up to the gods, as we saw with Helen and Aphrodite. And yet the humans are the ones who suffer the most. They're the ones who experience the tragedy of warfare and the tragedy of losing a brother, as Agamemnon almost does with his brother, Menelaus. And I think that's intentional on the part of Homer. And it's certainly intentional when we balance it out with the other book 21, where Achilles fights the river, because fighting the river, which is this futility of fighting the chthonic gods, the elemental forces, is also accompanied with a great deal of carnage, which we'll see when we look at book 21. We'll see that the carnage level there is like 10 times worse than this. And most of it is pitiable. It's not glorified at all. So the idea of kleos that most people point to in this book, and the glory of Agamemnon, I don't think that's the point. The point is that we're not supposed to be happy about this. The point is that even men like Agamemnon and Menelaus, who have done horrible things to get what they want, even they love each other and are concerned with each other. It paints a remarkably well-rounded vision of humanity, Homer does here. And at the same time, undercuts the gods. Takes the worship level of the gods right out from under them. Anyway, we end after all these different scenes of carnage. Here's the ending of the book. And now no man who waded into that work, the work of war, could scorn it any longer. Anyone still not speared or stabbed by tearing bronze, who whirled into the heart of all that slaughter, not even if great Athena led him by the hand, flicking away the weapons, hailing down against him. That day, ranks of Trojans, ranks of Achaean fighters sprawled there, side by side, face down in the dust. A beautiful conclusion to this book, because he ends this section talking about how Trojans and Achaeans, both the people that were associated with the Hittites, who were more civilized, and the loosely affiliated city-states of the Achaean nation, if you will, all these people who are fighting each other and killing each other fall down side by side. All of them face down in the dust. It doesn't matter. They're all dead. Where are their arguments now? Side by side, like brothers, almost, like Agamemnon and Menelaus. It's intentional. It's a wonderfully well-crafted, subtle way of pulling together different themes that propel us to think about the fragility of human life, the fragility of society, the sacred nature of human existence, and the awful tragedy that humans are trapped in, that the gods don't have to endure at all. In this terrible irony where the gods push us around beyond our control. And that sets us up for the next section, which is Diomedes, who fights the gods. In a wonderful irony here. Diomedes fights the gods, and we see more into the character of the gods, but we also see more into the courage of humans in the midst of this awfulness. And let's pull back for just a minute and look at the big picture. Why would all this be necessary? Why do we include this in the epic? Remember that one of the major themes is the theme of metamorphosis, the change from being a child to being an adult. Achilles is the example of this. He's the everyman. He's the guy who weeps, the Achilleos, the Akos. Right now, he's acting like a child. He's not taking seriously his responsibility to other human beings. And consequently, he's shut out from human society. He doesn't go through what they go through. This is the first bit of carnage we've seen in the epic on this scale, and Achilles is not part of it. Where is he, as it says in the rank and file in Book 2? Where is he? He's sitting in his tents, taking his ease like a god. And so he can't identify yet with what all these men go through in the world of men. Metamorphosis is about growing up. It's about shedding our childlike vision of the world and the naivete that accompanies it, and taking seriously what the world actually challenges us to take seriously. And part of that, I think, is the tragedy of human life, that we have to take that seriously. And part of that also is dispensing with the notion that everything's hunky-dory and that the gods are in their place and all's right in the world. Homer seems to be prompting us as readers to begin taking seriously our place among the ranks of humanity. And what does that mean? It means in some ways that it may mean we fight and die, but it means in some ways that we start to honor those who have fought and died before us and the sacrifices that they've made, and no longer taking it for granted, thinking ourselves to be the best of the Achaeans. When we do that, when we stop thinking of ourselves as being the end-all and be-all of this universe, we begin the possibility of moving towards seeing ourselves as human, not gods, and growing up, becoming truly adult, truly mortal, which for Homer is a glorious thing because the mortals are the heroes. On to book 5 next time. This is the end of the first quatrain, and we'll move on to book 5 next time. I thank you very much for joining me, if you have joined me, and we will see you in the near future when we talk about book 5. Thank you. God bless.